It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS, AM 1160, 101.1 FM, 9:13 in the morning. Our conversation with State Senator Joe Pittman, brought to you by Marcus and Mack, a law firm representing injured people. And good morning to you.
Todd, good morning to you.
It's been a really busy morning around here. And I did find out, I was telling you a couple of seconds ago, I did find out how to get under the collar of Jim Struzzi. And that's to say to him, Representative Struzzi, how are you enjoying those budget talks? Well, you're on the Senate Appropriations Committee.
Yes.
He's on the House Appropriations Committee, so I'll throw it at you. I mean, what have these talks been like for you?
Well, they've been contentious in the sense that it has highlighted how divergent we are in terms of our philosophy and how government should work. And that's been an issue, of course. We're all fortunate that as of this moment, our revenues are in pretty good shape relative to years past. I mean, we're $250 million ahead of estimate year to date. As long as things continue to hold the next few months, that should make the overall budgeting process much better. But it was an enlightening discussion for me. I learned a lot over those 3 weeks of hearings. But it is clear that, the point of view of the legislature as a whole and the point of view of the governor in terms of the direction our Commonwealth should go is pretty different.
I asked Representative Struzzi this. I said, is there any sort of feeling that the governor's proposal is just untenable in every way and the legislature is just going to start from scratch? And he said, no, they'll probably work within what the governor has proposed and work within that in terms of really constructing one that is more acceptable to the General Assembly.
Look, invariably this is give and take. He is the governor. It's his proposed budget. The only way we have a budget if he signs it. The only way we have a budget is if 26 senators and 102 House members put it on his desk. And as we've said before, if it was up to me individually, my budget would look much differently than the other 49 members of the Senate, let alone the governor. So there will be give and take. There are going to be some things that we're going to have to work through within the confines of the budget, and then also the issues that aren't directly tied into the budget. Obviously, his carbon tax and this new transportation climate initiative, this gas tax, are not directly part of the budget. But if we're going to have a voice in that process, the budget season is when we're going to have to make that voice known. So you can't just discount his proposals, but at the same time, you've got to pick. May have common ground and then go from there.
As these hearings have progressed, have there been specific topics where you said to yourself, now that's one I'm really interested in? That's something that has to be funded, or we have to find a different way of approaching this to get the funding that's needed?
Yeah, I think we have to take a very hard look at the realities of how we treat gaming in this Commonwealth. We heard a lot from the Lottery Fund, for example, about the issues of how much gaming opportunities have grown in the Commonwealth over the last 15 years. We've gone from casinos that were slot machines to then table games to internet gaming to now these games of skills, as they're called, and there's this great debate as to whether or not they're even legal, and then the concern of the impact that's having on the Lottery Fund. So I think that's an issue that we have to address one way or the other, because the concerns that have been raised are mutual concerns. And it does call into the reality of anytime we're using gambling dollars for revenue purposes, that at the end of the day we're talking about disposable income, and people only have so much disposable income unless you have a quality family sustaining job.
We have heard, of course, from the beginning of the budget process, and it's this way, whether there's a Republican in the governor's chair or a Democrat, that it seems to work into not a battle, but certainly a back and forth between the governor and the General Assembly. Within the General Assembly, however, are there items of consensus between Democrats and Republicans and items that you're far apart on?
I think there is real consensus within the General Assembly that, for example, this new tax on municipalities for state police operations is not something we're interested in. And in fairness to the governor, he's proposed this throughout his tenure, and it was proposed by previous governors, Democrat and Republican alike. And there is a real issue in terms of the state police being able to properly respond to calls throughout the Commonwealth, particularly in more rural areas. But I don't think it's reasonable to look at our smaller municipalities and assume that they can carry an additional burden to pay for those services. I mean, we as taxpayers pay for those operations to begin with, and I think we should get what we pay for. And yes, there are municipalities like Indiana Borough who can look at this as, well, this is a rural issue because municipalities aren't carrying local police, state police are added, have added burden. Because if I recall correctly, the city of Philadelphia, even though they have full complements of police force, still rely on the state police for, I believe, 7,000 calls a year. Mm-hmm. So, I don't think you can single us out as being the so-called problem.
Yeah. State system of higher education funding is always one of the top priorities when it comes to the budget cycle. And this year, even more so because of the extra request for the state system redesign. How have those talks gone in your eyes?
I think the redesign element of this has a long way to go. I don't think the chancellor has yet explained very well how us giving him an additional $100 million translates into his ability to save money. From our perspective, you either have the ability to save money or you don't. If we're going to put additional resources into the state system, my view is we need to put them in and reduce the overall cost of the education. The reality is the state system has been priced out of the market in a competitive perspective. So I have to recognize the overall demographics that we're facing statewide. And I also think we have lost sight of the fact that this isn't just a state system of higher education issue. We have 4 state-related universities. We have 14 community colleges. We have a very wide range of higher education delivery systems, and the demographics just aren't there to support that overall system.
Basic education funding is a whole different animal, but we're still on the education front. Talking with Representative Struzzi earlier, and the school safety grants were really something that were a bone of contention. Mm-hmm. When we talk about basic education funding in Pennsylvania, going through this particular cycle, what are we looking at? Is this approaching crisis stage?
Well, I think we're looking at an overall increase in basic education funding yet again. And, we continually do increase the subsidies to school districts generally. The benefit that they receive varies from district to district, and it's always been a real challenge to try to account for the uniqueness of every school district. There are school districts in this Commonwealth that have declining enrollments. There are school districts that have growing enrollments. Members that represent growing enrollment areas believe that we should be funding schools by a per pupil formula. I have a real problem with that because if Indiana School District loses an overall enrollment of 50 kids, for example, you spread that out K through 12, it's not like they're in a position to eliminate staff, eliminate bus routes, and have a commensurate savings. So I don't think you can look at this in a per pupil context. We're trying to develop a formula a few years ago to take into account more of those unique situations, but what we're now seeing is that there are some school districts in the state, not yet in this area, that are actually receiving less state funding from one year to the next. Mm-hmm. Historically, other than the stimulus funding under the Obama years, school districts do receive some level of increase every year. That is starting to trend the other way, and I think that's a concern for us in the out years.
Yeah. All right, so those budget talks will continue. You'll be involved in those all the way through the budget season. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, you're probably thinking about other things you'd like to see done here in the next 6 weeks to 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
What would be those top priorities for you?
Well, one of the things that we're doing over the next 3 weeks that's very, very important is outreach on encouraging people to respond to the census. We've talked about this before. April 1st is Census Day. This is extremely important to our communities that people respond to the census. I've said it once, I'll say it again. I believe responding to the census is every bit as, if not more important, than exercising your right to vote. Your census response is your voice. It directly impacts your communities. Everything we've just talked about as it relates to school funding, funding for roads, legislative representation relies on the census. And if you don't answer it, you've not only done yourself a disservice, but you've done your entire community a disservice. So we'll be doing some outreach on that in the next 3 weeks. I have a town meeting in Murraysville, I believe, on March 26th. I'd also like to point out, last week we had Secretary Davin, the Secretary of the Department of Community and Economic Development, in, and we toured both the Breeze Industrial Facility in Tunnelton as well as the Urban Outfitters facility here in White Township. Those are two really good economic development stories. Breeze is sitting there with just over 200 jobs, quality manufacturing, blue-collar union wage jobs. And then Urban, they're growing. I believe their employee count is up over 130, so they're well on their way. They have the expanded area open and operating. And those were two, I thought, really good prospects for us to highlight here in Indiana County.
All right, so those are things that we're looking at over the course of the next 6-8 weeks and 6 months, and however far that takes us out. Senator Pittman, thanks for being with us.
Todd, thank you.
It is the voice of Indiana County, WCCS, AM 1160, 101.1 FM. Boom.